Hello, everyone. I wanted to talk about the fact that most people don't really seem to be interested in reading anymore. Now, of course, I'm making this video and talking to audiences that, generally speaking, like reading, but that's not most people. So, some people can forget that on Talk or BookTube or whatever. Some people can forget the fact that they live in somewhat of an echo chamber, a good echo chamber, but the average person, the general population, um, doesn't really read that often. For example, I don't know anyone in my family who reads regularly. Now, some people in my family and people that I know used to read a lot, but they don't really anymore. Especially with the internet and social media and distractions, a lot of people just don't have the attention span. They don't read really at all. In fact, it deeply saddens me that even my, for example, niece, who's 11 years old, said that she hates reading. She finds it boring. And now I'm hoping that she'll grow out of it. For example, I didn't become hugely interested in reading until middle school. But although I wouldn't say that I hated reading when I was a kid, I was just apathetic to it. Um, so I don't judge children for that, but if someone's a teenager though and they still hate reading, I will be a little judgmental. But hopefully she'll grow out of it. But usually if a kid says they hate reading, not just they're not interested, but they hate reading, they find it boring. I think that's a bad sign, and because I think that now, of course, reading has had competition with visual media for a long time. I mean, really, ever since the 1950s when television first entered the home, um, uh, reading has had competition because it used to be before then if you wanted any kind of narrative entertainment. Now, of course, there was radio in the 40s and 30s, not as much competition, but let's say especially before, let's say in the 1920s, if you wanted any kind of narrative entertainment, well, then you had to read a book or something similar. But now, but reading requires a lot of engagement. It requires you to turn out the world and engage your mind, whereas watching movies or television, that's more passive. But what I fear, however, one of the things that people might not know is that people don't really even watch movies as much anymore, let alone read. Because even though watching a movie is a more passive, is has a more passive involvement than reading, it still requires you to pay attention, follow the story, but it seems to me that because of the internet, social media, even that has become difficult. Where I know some people who they can't even get through an entire movie without looking at their phone or doing other things, let alone read a book. And because the thing is that I think it's all about balance in the end. Because I don't think that these technologies are inherently have to be inherently bad, but it's all about balance. And it really saddens me, for example, that I went into Barnes at Noble recently, and I saw that there weren't nearly as many books. That the toy section was slowly inching and infringing on the book section, and there are far less books than ever before. Now, of course, people order a lot of things online now, but still, the physical state of stores can sometimes give you an idea of where society is headed. And now again, it's all about balance. Like, for example, I try to make time to read, and then I try to make time to do other things. And I think that people need to have structure in their life. So I try to read, for example, at least 2 hours every day. I have a morning session where I read for an hour, and then I have an evening session. Now I will admit that even for me it can be a struggle sometimes, because sometimes I don't always read in the evening, because I'll after writing I can be mentally drained, and sometimes I won't get to it, which is why I often will read far more when I'm not writing, because writing takes up some of that mental energy. Um, so, But anyway, though, I think that if you want to read more, then you have to structure it and schedule it in your life. Otherwise, you're never going to make time for it. Because the benefits of reading are, for one, you will enhance your vocabulary, so you'll know far more words and you'll be able to articulate your ideas far more efficiently. And also, but by reading, you explore in depth all of these concepts that you just can't explore in other ways through videos or through just reading articles. I mean, you can get surface level information by doing that, but you'll never really know anything in depth or become any kind of expert on anything unless you spend a lot of time reading and um, and um, and memorizing information. And also, of course, reading will also enhance your imagination, and it will lead you to think in new ways, and you'll be far less likely to conform to the thoughts and opinions of the groups around you if you've been exposed to a lot of different ideas from different people, from different cultures, from different time periods. So you'll become a far more well-rounded person by reading. But of course, that requires effort and it requires time. And a lot of people, they've become so passive that they don't want to make the effort or take the time, which I view that ultimately as an intellectual weakness. And so, yes, and it also troubles me because as a writer, because I'm thinking, if as a writer, if the general population doesn't read, then there's simply no way that one can make a living writing. They can maybe have a small niche audience that is loyal to them, but in terms of making a living, that's simply out of the question. And it seems to me that the only time the general population ever so-called reads is when there's some kind of really popular book that somehow the media promotes, and then people pick it up. Most of whom probably don't even read that book, and it becomes kind of a fad. And and then of course after a while, then the fad changes. And for example, they had the vampire craze, the young adult craze, dystopia craze. But again, nothing truly lasts, and you don't have authors who have rich literary careers who are admired by the public. That simply doesn't happen hardly ever. It hasn't happened in 50 years at least. And so I'm very cynical that most people don't read because it does. Because I can't say that it doesn't affect me, because it does affect me. Because if people don't read, then of course they're not going to read my books. And as a writer, I need people to read in order to make a living. So I just think it's a very unfortunate situation in the end. Now, of course, there will always be readers, but I don't know if we will ever have again a culture that loves reading. That may be something of the past.